Welcome to PodBand Podcast, the premier PodBand podcast.
Yay, that was perfect.
Good job.
Ooh.
So now we're live.
Sort of.
Sort of. Not live, but
We're recording.
We're live.
we're going. We're off and going.
Yes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to PodBand Podcast. This is our guest, Michael Henningsen, and he is today. By the way, I don't know. Do you prefer Michael or Mike?
Usually Michael.
Okay. I called you Mike because that's what I remember calling you before, but I didn't know.
Yeah. Actually, I prefer Laird Michael Wallace.
Laird Michael. Okay. Well, anyway.
No, I'm just kidding.
This is our guest, Mr. Michael Henningsen, and he's here today to talk about lots of things. First of all, if you've been paying attention to the PodBand Podcast world, we've been the past couple episodes talking about the history of the uniform and the stuff that we wear and how we're not really historical reenactors because a lot of our stuff has evolved over the years in pipe bands, and that's fine. That's cool. Well, Mr. Michael, aside from being a skilled drummer in pipe bands and many other things which he'll talk about, is also a, quote, historical person, and he's going to talk about all the things that he does and wears and educates about, and it's going to be a ton of fun. So we're excited. And we're going to let him introduce himself in the form of answering some of our questions.
So, yeah. How did you get involved in pipe bands?
Well, as Kaylee can identify with, it was kind of a family thing. My family, well, I come from a very large family, 6 kids, and our mother really wanted us all to be involved in music of some sort. So my sisters played the piano, they took piano lessons, one played the guitar, even had a ukulele in there. And from the time I was about 5 years old, I picked up brass instruments. Our neighbor across the street played tuba in the shrine band, and he had a mellophone that I just thought was a gas. So I picked it up and started playing it and changed over to trombone through elementary school. Well, my older brother, Lou, couldn't decide what he wanted to play. And finally, he said, "Mom, I want to learn how to play bagpipes." Now, in 1967, in Phoenix, there weren't very many bagpipe bands.
Understandably.
But there were enough that my brother could get lessons and little brother could tag along. Well, I started with tenor drum. Hey, tenor drum.
Yay, that's us.
And picked it up fairly quickly, but I also fell in love with all of the stuff. Just all of the cool uniforms, the cool pins and badges and hats and all kinds of things. And by the end of 8th grade, my high school did not have a band. So I had to make a decision, and I put the trombone down and devoted to Scottish pipe band drumming. And it's been over 50 years. 50 years. That's a long time. Now, I did take a break for a while in there and picked up about 20 different instruments that I also play, and have gotten back into pipe band with a fervor like I never had before. My brother also kind of laid off the pipes for a while, and he picked them up a while ago. And well, if I could brag about my big brother, at 65, he took first in a Pembroke competition in Scotland.
Wow.
Hey.
Oh, good job.
At 65.
Dang.
So all you people out
So it's
there
been
who are
kind of a
listening,
family thing. Excuse me?
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, all you people out there who are listening, I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm older, I'm not sure that I'll ever be any good at this. You will be. We got proof.
Yep. If you practice and stick to it, do as you're taught, and you will learn, and you'll have a world of fun, literally a world of fun with it. So my older brother and I had not played together in a band for nearly 40 years. And several years ago, we met face to face at the Stone Mountain Highland Games. And it was just fun to play again with him.
Oh, that's so nice.
Before we go to the next question, since you picked up 20 instruments, which one has been your favorite so far?
The didgeridoo.
Hi.
It's just a lot of fun. And it makes neat noise, and you can tap on it, and it's just fun.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And they blend well with the pipes. There are a couple of contemporary Celtic rock bands that use the didgeridoo right along with it.
That's fun. We have one of those. We should incorporate it into the band. I've never tried to play it, but Alex can.
Why am I not surprised Alex can?
Yeah.
So next question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to also give a shout out because a lot of people may not know this, but Mr. Henningsen was actually one of the founders of the Mesa Caledonian Pipe Band, our band that we're in Arizona. So as you said, there weren't a lot of pipe bands in Phoenix, Arizona at that time, so something happened and you just decided to start one along with Chris and Rick and James Grant and whoever would come along, right?
Well, talk about a family deal. I actually started with the Phoenix Scottish. And my first drum teacher was your Uncle Duncan.
Yeah.
And then it turned around that I was your other uncle's instructor. Talk about a family situation.
Yeah, kind of weird the way that all goes full circle.
The Henningsens and Hossicks go back over 50 years.
Spooky.
Yep.
And okay, so pieces together, if you're listening and you think about how this goes. So Duncan Hossick taught Michael here, who was the drum sergeant, first ever drum sergeant of Mesa Caledonian, who then taught Dave, who was the next drum sergeant of Mesa Caledonian up until last year, when Dave, who had taught Cody, who's my brother, once again of another family, is now the drum sergeant of Mesa Caledonian. So this whole line, it's this whole line, and it's crazy. But we're really glad that you were part of that whole chain.
It's amazing. And that's one of the things that has kept me involved and has gotten me now doing this as my retirement gig. It's that whole family community thing that has been so important.
Yeah, even if you're not family with people that you play with, Adela and I are like family. She's like my sister. So you become family.
For the period of time that I dropped out, I didn't realize how much I missed a lot of the people. And getting back into it, I have reacquainted with some very, very dear friends, and it's been wonderful.
Yay.
Seems to be the most consistent thing that people say on this show is there's no family like your pipe band family.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
Well, now I'm feeling all warm and fuzzy. This is something.
I'm feeling warm, not fuzzy yet.
Not fuzzy. All right, we'll get on with the questions so you can get comfy. So, you've played a lot of instruments and everything. What made you interested in historical research and the reenactment side of things?
The historical research, again, was a family thing. I had a friend who claimed lineage back to the Mayflower. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I can trace some of my ancestry back to Denmark. And one day I was driving around Washington, D.C., and I discovered the Daughters of the American Revolution have a library there with all these genealogies. And so my friend was looking up her great grandparent. And I went off to a computer and I found a handwritten ship's log with my 5th great grandfather's name handwritten on it. I knew what day he got onto the boat. I knew what boat he got onto, and later I found out which deck on the boat he had his cabin. And all of a sudden he became real. And I could kind of touch history that way. And so my interest in history really got sparked through doing my own family history. Well, then I showed up here in Southwest Virginia, which is so full of history. Every time you trip over something, it has a historical value. It's a tree, it's a rock, it's something that's been here throughout all of American history. And I visited a little site where the Revolutionary Army, the militia of Washington County gathered to begin to march against the Redcoats, the Loyalists, and there on the wall was a painting of the last colonial governor of Virginia, all in his Highland regalia. Well, for me, that raised an intriguing question. If the Acts of Prescription outlawed the wearing of the kilt, how come there's a picture of this guy in a kilt? What's going on here? And the more I researched Lord Dunmore, John Murray, the last colonial governor of Virginia, I found that a lot of the things that I had picked up culturally in pipe band wasn't historically true. Imagine that. There never was a time where, according to Mel Gibson, they were playing outlawed tunes on outlawed pipes. The pipes weren't outlawed. Certain weaponry was, and certain Highland dress, well, there was a big but in the Acts of Prescription. You couldn't wear the kilt or the tartan, but if you're in government service or the military, we'll pay you to. And it's been an incredible find. This area was loaded with Highland regiments fighting in kilts, wearing bagpipes, wearing kilts, and even the Patriot militias, we have evidence that they were playing the bagpipes too. And the Highland regiments were specifically called and raised in the southern states to set up a barrier against the Spanish, and in the mountain states to set up a barrier against the French. So by researching this colonial governor, who, by the way, had been at Culloden serving Bonnie Prince Charlie as a squire. He was a Jacobite traitor. And there was his picture 25 years later serving under the very crown he had fought against. Interesting, not all Jacobites were hunted down by the Black Watch and killed. A lot of them moved on and were given land grants here in Virginia. It was the largest and wealthiest colony in America, and the king just wanted to capture as much of it as possible. And so it was that particular image of Governor Dunmore that just flipped a switch for me. Got me involved with that little historical site, the muster grounds, where troops muster. It's not yellow sausage put on a hot dog. It's muster. And for the last 7 years or so, I have been just captivated by learning and telling the stories of history.
Cool. I realize now that I've asked this question that I skipped a question. But that's kind of a good segue. Adela, do you want to ask question 2?
Question 2?
Yeah.
We go back to that one? Okay.
I think we skipped that one.
And you
We
can
did skip that one.
in any order you want.
Okay. So going back, what do you do now in the pipe band world and just in general?
Pipe band world. After 40 some years, I'm now drum sergeant.
Yeah.
Actually, drum sergeant major.
All the stripes.
Our drum sergeant for the Appalachian Highlanders is just, well, he's getting up there in years and having some back issues, and he's asked me to take over as drum sergeant. And so moving ahead, we're trying to build a new drum corps. We have a couple of drummers, but we're using fife and drum to help build that. So is that another question?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about, because some people, I know we have people who watch this who are in the UK or in like various parts of the country who don't know what that is. We're going to have another episode talking all about fife and drum. And that's really fascinating that you're using it for recruiting. I'm sure we'll be excited to hear about that.
Okay.
So yeah, and then you also do all the historical society stuff through the, which battleground is it?
Right. We do have a local historical society, and we have a cemetery that goes back almost 300 years. So we've got lots of American history buried in this area, and there are some Virginia governors, there are some famous and not so famous people. So the Historical Society does a walking tour. We call it a ghost tour. And you hear the story of Southwest Virginia by the people who live there, reside there, hang out there. And given the historical portrayals that I do for the muster grounds, the Historical Society asked if I would do something. So I said, I don't know anybody that lives in the cemetery, and I'm not from around here. So as I was researching, I found a family name. Who'd have thought?
Spooky.
And the more I dug, I had to take it back a whole bunch of generations to that Mayflower descendant. And it turns out this guy that I found lived in this town from 1803 to 1835. He ran the finest establishment in Southwest Virginia. He was an innkeeper, a tavern owner. And one of his claim to fame was he had a full-time dance instructor. So this was during the time like of Jane Austen and in Victorian times. So they would host these fancy dress invitational balls until 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. So he hired a full-time dance instructor to make sure that his daughters knew all of the latest steps of the day. Well, one of those steps that was introduced was the quadrille, kind of a square dance with couples on either side. Now you add some fancy fiddling to the quadrille, and a couple hundred years, and it becomes the square dance. One of the dance professors at East Tennessee State University traces back the history of square dance to taverns in Southwest Virginia that had full-time dance instructors. And there was only one. His story is really incredible. His house, or his tavern, had a well that was actually down in a cave. And it was the cave where Daniel Boone's dogs got attacked by a bunch of wolves. So the area is called Wolf Hills. And kids used to like to go down into this cave. And when the innkeeper would lower his well bucket down into the well, they'd pull the bucket aside and load it with rocks and run away and giggle. That was part of the pranks of the day.
Dang kids.
Funny things of history. Yeah, mean kid. Funny things that you don't learn in history books. That when you find them, history becomes alive. And in that, I've started as my retirement gig, History Alive Tours. And we host guided tours through historic Abingdon in Southwest Virginia, telling the story of the area based on people who actually lived or influenced the area. One of which is the Lord Dunmore.
Great segue to the next question.
Go ahead. The next question.
You've told us a little bit about Lord Dunmore, and is that the costume that you're wearing right now, or do you have it with you?
I don't.
Okay.
I do have a picture of it. It's missing something.
Well, I'm sorry. Could you just walk us through the pieces of the costume, and then what it's missing and what
you have on
it has, and kind of why that's special?
Okay, I can do that. Let me reposition this so that I can get from head to toe. Oh.
By the way,
hello.
People who are just listening, we do have the video of all of our episodes available on our Patreon, patreon.com/PodBand Podcast, where you can see this video and all of the cool things that Michael has brought to show us. Plus,
okay. Starting from the bottom, buckle shoes. The painting of Lord Dunmore does have buckle shoes. They did not wear ghillie brogues back in the 1700s. The word ghillie actually means dance, and those are dance slippers. So with all the fancy laces going up your legs, those were the fancy dance shoes. The everyday shoes would have been buckle shoes just like this. The stockings that I'm wearing were actually called kadach. And this particular pattern, I grew up calling them diced hose. They're called the war stripe. And they were typically with this red and white diced pattern, significant of the soldiers heading into war. Tied in place with a garter, specifically tied with a garter knot. And many of our garters today in the modern pipe band, they have loops and are made out of either the tartan or made out of ribbon. When you actually tie a garter knot, it becomes the same pattern as our garters today. In the stocking here is a skein-dhu. Skein-dhus are a knife sock, means hidden knife or dark knife. It hadn't really become popular until about 1780 or a little bit after. Instead, you had one under your arm called a skein uckle, an armpit knife, kind of like in Braveheart when the Irishman pulls out his thing, I'm smart enough to get a dagger past your guards. they would have had a dagger under their arm, the skin buckle instead. Moving up is the belted plaid, or the plaid, or the full plaid, however you want to call it. And we have evidence that the regiments were issued tartan material, and they had to pleat the back and then bring it over their shoulder. That's a utility garment, so you could wrap yourself in it. You can use it as a blanket. You can use it as a seat. You're quite debonair, dashing. So that's the great kilt, or the belted plaid, or the plaid, or the plaid more, and in comparison to the Philly bag, the short kilt. Short kilt that we're familiar with today is just the lower part of the kilt. That was invented by an Englishman. He had a lumber business, and all of his Scottish workers were getting this stuff caught up in the sawmill, and that really wasn't safe. So he invented the little kilt, which had gained popularity in the early 1700s. In the Acts of Prescription, again, the little kilt is mentioned specifically unless you're in government or military. Then you can wear it. Moving up, this is a sporran. It's a purse. It's a man purse from Scotland. This particular one is an ancient design. It holds everything that you want when you don't have other bags to hold it in. Moving up again, a waistcoat, or waistcoat, as it's called, much like the waistcoat that I have in the Mesa Caledonian tartan. It comes down lower and has very large pockets, and would have been worn as an under jacket, waistcoat, worn with a long sleeve shirt, a shirt that would come down well to your mid-thigh or lower. So all that itchy wool isn't so itchy because you got a nice shirt underneath. Waist belt holds it all together, holds it all in nice and tight, and holds your dirk in an appropriately obscene place. The dirk has quite a tradition of representing a guy's manliness. Almost like Crocodile Dundee, when the guy pulls out a little dagger and says, "This is a knife." A Scot would pull out, "Now that's a knife." The dirk is specific to Scotland, although it's a Dutch word that means dagger. The Scottish dirk is typically 14 inches long, 12 to 14 inches long. And over the course of time, the handle, get a little closer for those who are on video, the handle is usually carved wood, but this particular pattern is a series of Turk's head knots that a sailor would have tied. Once the Union was formed, many of the Scottish sea captains refused to fly under a Union Jack, and they left, taking their dirks to sea with them. Almost 100 years later, the dirk reemerged with a carved handle that looked just like the mariner knots. Along with that, the earliest dirks have another little implement here. The earliest dirks have what's called a marling spike, or a bodkin, or a fid. It's used for tying and untying those knots. Today's dirk has a little knife and a fork in it. So, waistcoat, officer sash, red sash designates me as one of the officers of the Corps. This is a red coat. Today, I am a red coat. Typically, field drummers and field musicians wore the opposite color of their fighting soldiers. So they would have a blue coat with red trim, where the colonial soldiers had, the soldiers had blue coat with a various colored trim, and the field musicians would wear a red coat. It's confusing. Don't shoot somebody because of their coat. It's not fun. The plaid comes over the shoulder, is held in place with a traditional brooch. All of these military fittings are from the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, who did fight in our war for independence. These are more modern designs, but this cross belt would be used to hold a typical Scottish sword, just like this. Now, in Governor Dunmore's mansion, in order to show off all of his manliness, you walk into his mansion in Williamsburg, Virginia, and the walls are lined with crossed Scottish broadswords, showing that he was in command of the Highland regiments. Command whistle. Light infantry regiments gave their commands frequently on close quarters using a command whistle like that. Just briefly, one of the differences between bagpipe bands and fife and drum corps is that fifers and drummers are soldiers, first of all. They're part of the communication network. They give the signals to order the troops, to march them around, to do whatever movements are necessary on the battlefield. So they're not really a band, they are a corps of field musicians. Pipers are pipers. They're musicians. Just like the military bands of old, they don't fight, they play music. And so the uniforms are different, and that tradition carries through today. Through many of the Highland regiments, the drummers will wear a military style uniform, or even trousers or trews, or they will wear a different uniform than the pipers, because the drummers are soldiers first and then musicians, giving the signal corps. So on the field, a silver whistle like this was actually used by Patrick Ferguson at the Battle of Kings Mountain to command the Loyalist troops, and it gave away his position on the battlefield. He had said, written to Lord Cornwallis, "I'm on Kings Mountain, and I'm king of the mountain, and God and all his angels won't remove me from this mountain." Well, I can tell you, God has not removed Patrick Ferguson from Kings Mountain. He's under a pile of rocks in there. So it was Ferguson's whistle that gave away his location on the battlefield. Moving up. This is a cravat, not an ascot or anything. Now, a cravat's very, very important in that you don't want your throat to get cold. You don't want your throat exposed to the wind and the elements or the enemy's sword. So the cravat was actually a very important part of the military uniform to protect your neck. And that developed into the stand collar tunics many of the pipe bands wear today. Some of the soldiers would put a leather strip inside their cravat to give them extra force. They were known as Marines, which is why they're called leathernecks today, because of the leather that they would put in their collar. Moving up, we have the Scots bonnet. So you can see it here. I was just doing some research on the bonnet today, and it was kind of a pancake hat. And over the years, we've tended to pull it to the side a little bit, and quite typical of the Scots. In fact, one of the tunes that we played is, "All the blue bonnets are over the border." But the hat is very characteristic, and as a military trophy, a hackle would be put into the hat to express some regimental indication. The red hackle was supposed to be an indication of honor. In Dunmore's painting, he has a black hackle, which shows he's at war with somebody. So what is lacking from this outfit for Governor Dunmore's is Dunmore's tailcoat and waistcoat are of his family tartan. His kilt is of the government tartan, so he could legally wear the kilt and wear his tartan, which is the Murray of Tullibardine, but it was a known Jacobite tartan. So there in the painting, he stands in his full Highland regalia as a Jacobite, wearing a Jacobite tartan, serving in the Scots Guard regiment under the Hanover king he had fought against. What tells quite a story of this traitor turned loyalist. That's my outfit from bottom to top.
That's really cool. Thank you for all the detail.
Yeah, so many fun things on it.
Yeah.
There are. That's why I'm so interested. All of the buttons.
Yeah.
Many pacifist groups would not wear buttons on their clothes because buttons were specifically a military thing. And so all of these buttons speak of importance. I'm an important guy. I got all kinds of buttons.
Oh, I don't have any buttons. I'm not important.
Darn it.
Yes, you're important.
Gotta go get a jacket to put on or something. Need some buttons.
Those crazy diamond-shaped thistle buttons that are a nuisance to try to button.
Mm-hmm.
These round ones are much easier.
Hey everyone, producer Alex here, just coming in to let you know we originally planned for this interview to be 2 parts, but we're actually going to be making it 3 parts just because we got a lot of great information with Michael and we wanted to kind of spread that out over a few episodes. So this is the end of the first part, and then we have the second part next week, and then the third part the following week. So yeah, have a good week, everybody.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this show, then support us on Patreon for exclusive content as well as the video of us recording this. We'll have special exercises we'll be writing as well as tips and tricks with tenor drumming and other instruments to come. Subscribe to us on YouTube for some tenor tutorials and possibly other tutorials later on. And like us on Facebook at PodBand Podcast.